Today, we are going to completely change how you see something you probably look at every single day, a tree. We think of them as these giant symbols of life, right? But the truth is, so much stranger, and honestly, way more amazing.
Okay, so let's just start with this. Go ahead, look at the nearest tree you can see. It seems pretty alive, doesn't it? I mean, it's got leaves, it's growing, it's a living thing. But what if I told you that's not the whole story? Not even close.
In fact, our source material puts it this way, and you gotta hear this. Every tree you've ever seen is dead. I know, that sounds completely backward. But in a very real, very biological way, it's absolutely true.
So here's the wild part. The huge majority of a tree, we're talking over 99% of its sheer mass, is not actually alive. The living part is just this incredibly thin, almost paper-thin layer of cells. It's sandwiched between this massive dead skeleton on the inside, what we call wood, and a dead protective suit of armor on the outside, the bark. So how on earth does that even work? And why would life ever choose such a bizarre strategy?
Well, to understand this incredible paradox, we've got to go back in time. Way, way back. Let's jump into part 1 and see how this all got started in an ancient, high-stakes battle for the sky.
So for over 1 billion years, the ancestors of plants were just kind of floating around in the ocean. Pretty chill. But about 470 million years ago, they made the leap to land. And that kicked off an all-out war. The battleground was straight up. The prize? Sunlight. See, the higher a plant could grow, the more sun it could soak up, basically starving its competitors down below. Height became a deadly weapon.
But there was a problem. Early plants were soft, flimsy. That put a pretty low ceiling on how tall they could get. And then came an evolutionary game changer, a brand new material called lignin. Think of it as nature's superglue. It's this macromolecule that is incredibly rigid, super tough, and waterproof. Basically the perfect building material to win the war for height.
And I love this analogy from our source. Lignin was like concrete in a world made of jelly. It filled in all the gaps in the plant structure, locking everything into a solid, strong frame. All of a sudden, plants could build skyscrapers. And around 385 million years ago, this incredible innovation gave us the very first trees. But okay, being a skyscraper creates a massive plumbing problem, right? How in the world do you get water from the basement all the way up to the penthouse and then get food from the penthouse back down to everyone else? Well, as we'll see in part 2, trees solved this with something our source calls a conveyor belt of death.
The secret, the absolute control center for a tree's growth, is something called the cambium. And it's just this razor-thin circle of stem cells, but its job is huge. It constantly creates new, specialized cells in 2 directions, inward toward the center of the tree and outward toward the bark.
And this is where things get really wild. Let's follow a single cell that gets pushed inward. First, it's born from the cambium, then its lignin production goes into absolute overdrive, making its walls super hard. After that, it does something incredible. It hollows itself out. It literally destroys everything inside that made it a living cell. And finally, it dies, leaving behind a hard, empty tube. Year after year, these tubes stack up, creating what we call wood, which is essentially a graveyard of trillions of hardened plant bones.
So now the tree has this massive network of dead pipes called xylem. But how does it get water up them without a heart or a pump? Well, it's just pure physics. See, water molecules are sticky. They cling to each other like tiny magnets, forming this one continuous rope of water all the way from the roots to the very highest leaves. And when the sun heats up those leaves, water evaporates out. This evaporation pulls on that rope, creating this incredible tension that just sucks the entire column of water upwards.
And the power of this system it's just astonishing. This pull is so strong it can lift water over 100 meters into the air. Now, to put that into perspective, the very best pumps humans have ever built can only manage about 10 meters before the intense pressure makes the water literally boil. Trees figured out how to do 10 times better using nothing but physics and a whole lot of dead cells.
Okay, so that's the dead plumbing system that moves water up, but what about the living part? The part that has to move food around and send information? Well, for that, let's jump to part 3 and take a look at the tiny living layer. This is the job of those cells the cambium pushes outward. They form something called the phloem, the tree's living pipeline. And unlike the dead xylem tubes, these cells stay alive. Just barely.
Their whole job is to transport the sugary food made in the leaves down to the rest of the tree and to send signals throughout the entire organism. So let's just break this down nice and clear. You've got the xylem, that's the inner wood. It's dead. Its only job is to move water up. Then you've got the phloem, that thin layer on the outside. It's alive, and it's responsible for moving sugar and information both up and down. Two completely different systems running side by side, one dead, one alive. But as you can imagine, this thin, living layer is incredibly fragile. It's the tree's lifeline. So the tree protects it with, you guessed it, yet another layer of dead cells, the bark. It's a hard, protective wall, a second conveyor belt of death, really, that shields that vital living phloem from damage, from pests, from everything.
And this brings us right back to our main mind-bending point. As the source just perfectly puts it, the living part of the stem is really just this extremely thin and tiny layer, sitting on a thick mountain of cell corpses. This is why carving your initials into a tree can actually be so deadly for it. You're not just scratching the surface, you're cutting right through its one and only lifeline.
So a tree is mostly dead. It seems like such a weird way to build a life. But this bizarre strategy leads to one of the most stunning consequences in all of biology. So for our final section, let's look at how trees are, in a way, built to be immortal. Because of this system of constantly adding new living layers on the outside and leaving the old dead structure inside, trees just don't age like we do. There's no biological clock inside them ticking down, telling them it's time to get old and die. In principle, they are potentially immortal. What finally gets a tree isn't old age. It's the world around it. A disease, a powerful storm, a long drought, or, well, a human with a saw. And how long can this possibly go on? Well, there are trees alive today that are over 5,000 years old. Just think about that for a second. They were just little saplings when the first pyramids were being built in Egypt. They have stood there and watched almost the entire story of human civilization unfold. So, the next time you look at a tree, remember what you're really seeing. It's not one simple, living thing. It's an empire built on the skeletons of its own past, always reaching for the sky. And that leaves us with one last fascinating question to think about. If a tree doesn't die of old age, what else is it capable of?